My neighbors allowed their son to kidnap my cat and helped him to keep her hidden, even while I was walking around the neighborhood putting up flyers. And do you know what happened to my cat? And how about their attitude? You can't imagine. My story happened in the house I grew up in. We lived in a subdivision right outside the city, so while all the houses were large villas, the properties weren't that big, and as a result, the houses were not that far apart. I had an aging cat named Faye, whom I loved dearly. She'd go for walks by herself, but never for more than a few hours at a time. She also didn't venture far from our house. One afternoon she didn't come home and I was distraught. My family and I immediately started putting up flyers, walking around the area, calling her name and knocking on doors to ask if anyone had seen her. The first door I knocked on was that of our next-door neighbors, a young couple with a 10-year-old son. They were new to the area, but we already knew each other and they knew my cat Faye. The mom answered the door and told me she hadn't seen my cat, but that I could always get another one. That struck me as strange, but I was in no mood to explain the bond between pets and their people, so I just continued on to the next house. For the next 6 days I kept looking for Faye and putting up flyers, and everyone I came across was so sympathetic and kind, except for that same woman next door. She drove by while I was putting up flyers and asked me to stop littering the neighborhood. She said that it was time for me to just let go. Since I'd already realized that these people were strange, they let their son play on the roof of the greenhouse and they never mowed their lawn. I just left it at that. That same night, I sat in the garden and tried to read a book, but I couldn't stop thinking about my dear beloved cat. The boy next door was bouncing a ball up against our shed fence. He really started to get on my nerves when he decided to be his own very loud sports commentator, so I climbed up the apple tree to be just able to see him enough and to get him to stop making such a noise. I started telling him to quiet down when I saw movement in the window behind him. Before my brain could catch up with my eyes, I heard the most awful and heartbreaking wail you could imagine. I instantly realized that this was my cat Faye, scratching at the garage window and crying for me. If I'd had any doubts that the boy knew that this was my cat locked up in his garage, they disappeared when I saw the "oh crap" look on his face. He dropped his ball and ran straight to the front of the house. If the tree had been closer to the fence, I would have just jumped over it. I was that desperate and furious. Since I cannot fly, I had to settle for jumping down, running through the garden, out the gate, down the street, and storming up to the neighbor's front door. When the mom opened the door, I could tell from her expression, some fear but mostly annoyance, that she knew I knew. I knew I needed to have it out with this woman, but I needed to get Faye and make sure she was okay first. I honestly thought that they'd hand her over now, and that they'd been caught, but she tried to deny it. Not only was it not my cat, according to this sorry excuse for a human being, there wasn't even a cat in the garage at all. My dad had seen me running through the garden like a lunatic and had followed to see what I was doing. He listened to our discussion and then stepped back out on the road for a few minutes. When he returned, this woman's husband had joined in the conversation, and they were both denying that they'd even seen my cat since she went missing a week earlier. At that point, the little brat came to the door as well and squeezed his way in front of his parents. He just stood there smirking. Truthfully, I probably would have ended up hitting the little turd if my dad hadn't chosen that moment to calmly announce that he'd just called the police and reported them for theft and animal cruelty. Because she was apparently locked in a garage, we still didn't know how bad it truly was, and that the officers were on their way. Finally, something wiped those smug expressions off their faces, with the exception of the brat. He just looked pissed, and apparently he couldn't stay quiet anymore because he whined, "It's my cat now. I found it, and Mommy and Daddy said I could keep it if it stayed quiet. You know those rare moments in life? The ones you almost exclusively encounter in works of fiction, when timing works out perfectly? This turned out to be one of them. Two uniformed police officers walked through the garden gate less than 6 feet from where we all were. At the exact moment the kid made his declaration, the presence of the police coupled with their son's admission was enough to make the parents change tact. They started saying that my cat had just run into their garage and refused to leave for a week, and they reluctantly let us all back there and opened the garage door. Up until then, I'd been pissed off, but now I just started to cry. My sweet old cat was all skin and bones, and her fur matte and dirty, but she still ran to me and literally jumped in my arms. My dad is a gentleman who never swears, but when he saw the conditions in the garage, he let out a stream of curse words I didn't even know existed. They hadn't given her a litter box, so she peed and pooped on any little piece of paper that she could find. There was no sign of food or water, and later on, when the police searched their home, they found nothing to indicate that they'd ever bought cat food or fed her anything else. The couple was arrested for animal cruelty after the social worker, who took their son in while they were in custody, went through his room in order to pack a few things for him. Charges of child neglect were added. My darling Faye spent 2 days in the veterinary hospital due to dehydration and some intestinal trouble caused by an unknown toxin. Who knows what that little monster made her eat? Thankfully, she recovered nicely, and we got to have her 2 more wonderful years. Quite impressive when you consider that this ordeal happened at a time when she was 17 already. Both the mom and dad were convicted on the animal abuse charge as well as for the neglect of their son. To my surprise, they actually spent a couple of years locked up between them, and they lost custody of their son when they failed to live up to certain conditions up to their release. I went to the mother's sentencing and witnessed how she tried to convince the judge that she hadn't even known that Faye belonged to anyone. Since Faye was tattooed and wore a collar with my contact info on it, the judge didn't buy it and said he wouldn't accept the deal that they had been worked out unless she was honest. She finally admitted that she knew perfectly well that Faye was mine, but her son had seen her walking through the yard and grabbed him. Since he had wanted a cat anyway, she decided to let him keep Faye. After all this, she still seemed confused that I had gotten so upset when Faye went missing. I found that totally unacceptable. If you agree with me about that, please share this video with your friends and family. We are looking for more stories about animals. If you have any interesting stories for us, please email them to animalsmylove999@gmail.com. Thanks so much and see you in the next video.